Hello!
Hello AOS fans!
It's the Agents of Underworlds.
And in this video we're asking, what could GW do with Underworlds next?
So recently we did do a video about, is Underworlds being cancelled?
Which was a bit tongue-in-cheek.
And a little bit clickbaity.
Which people did comment on, thanks for that. So we wanted to kind of follow up on that. We've got quite a few good comments.
Yep.
And we've had quite a lot of discussion, particularly on our Discord, which you can join if you become a Patreon member, about what the game might do. And then we ran a tournament a couple of weeks ago and we chatted to a couple of the attendees there about what they thought Underworlds might do. We don't want to be all clickbaity and like do gloom and doomy. We want to kind of think of ways that GW, what they might do with Underworlds next, what we think they should do, how we can think they could sort of support it a little bit better and just lift the community. The community feels a little bit flat at the moment.
Yeah.
Because of the sort of deluge and then cutting and then no news and then whatever. And people doing horrible clickbaity videos on YouTube as well, not helping.
So based on the things that we've talked to other people about online and everywhere else, we've probably got 5 different things that GW could do. So we're just going to run through those 5 different options and how we think that they could be implemented and what they might bring to the game.
Number 4 will blow your mind!
Oh my god! So the first one is GW could literally do nothing.
Yeah, that's our idea. Number 1 is nothing.
Yeah, they could just keep doing what they're doing now, which is releasing stuff as and when, and just not really supporting anybody or telling us what's going on.
Giving you a bit of guessing game when the next box might come, or you might suddenly turn around the corner and there are 3 boxes sitting there waiting.
Yeah.
You just don't know. To be honest, that's our least favourite option of the things we're going on about.
It's probably the most likely.
Exactly, yes. Underworlds always feels like a bit like the poor sister to some of the big box games, which is kind of fair enough because it is the poor sister to a lot of the big box games. It's not satisfactory. If you've got a small fan base, then you kind of need to look after it almost more, because if you lose 10% of your fan base, then suddenly
you've got a lot less people.
And if you lose that critical mass, then it's hard to build it back up again. And they've done it once. After COVID, they built the critical mass back up. Yeah. And I think when we ran our tournament back in autumn last year, I think it was like...
It felt like it was going great guns.
And then since then, well, probably for various reasons, but we have struggled to get as many people into the tournaments. So I'm not sure, as an approach, their kind of you get it when you get it approach is working fully well. I mean, their sales figures may tell something different, but that's just how, anecdotally, that's how we feel.
So the second option is one that people have mentioned several times online.
And in person.
And it's basically that GW need to reboot Underworlds like they have with AOS and like they do with 40k every 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. They have the 3-year cycle and they chuck out what they don't like and they bring in new stuff. Underworlds, they do bring in new bits and they do drop bits, but basically its core engine is identical to Shadespire.
They could use it as an opportunity to go through all the warbands. They could legend some of them to say you can't buy Chosen Axes anymore, so you can play with them if you got them, but they're a Legends warband now. They're not going to be one that you're going to take to tournaments and stuff like that, which I know would upset some people.
Equally, they could use the opportunity of a reboot to revitalise old warbands, and they have revitalised old warbands, in fact more than I thought they might have done. But they could say, right, actually for this reboot, let's bring back the Chosen Axes and Garrick's Reavers because people love those, and then we're going to give them a lift.
They could even utilise the approach they've done in 40k and AOS by going, look, we're going to redo everything, so for a lot of these we're going to replace them at some point, so here's a bunch of stuff in PDF form, you can go and print it out and use it until we can get those other things to you. They could do that again with all the cards for all the warbands.
Yeah, possibly proxy the models if they're not going to redo the models. So they could do that. I'm pretty sure they won't, but they could do that. For me, the biggest reason to reboot it is that they could iron out some of those wrinkles in the rules. Because it has built on built, there's a few interactions which are a bit weird. Like we were talking about one today, somebody was asking on our Discord, which again you can join if you support us on Patreon. If you're flying, then you can fly over a lethal hex, but you still take damage if you're pushed into it. But if you're flying and you go over a stagger hex, then you're staggered. Yeah, I mean, you could argue it makes some sense in some cases, but it doesn't really. And there's just a few things like that that could be...
Reaction windows is another one. They could after an activation, stay the same as after an attack.
They could actually get rid of all of after an attack and just have it all as after an activation. Or
wherever it goes.
They could define those windows much more tightly.
They could also use it as an opportunity to maybe try out some new rules. Maybe they change the crit mechanic, or maybe they change some of the stats in the game and how things function a bit. Maybe how the boards get placed.
And I would like them to see them set it in stone for X period of time and not keep giving us little add-ons.
The third option that at least one or two people, and probably ourselves, have also thought of in the past is they completely rebrand Underworlds in the 40k setting. Oh. Now, before you switch off, hear us out.
That is probably our biggest, most left field choice.
Yes, yeah.
I'm surprised they haven't done it in some ways, because 40k is their biggest IP thing. I don't think they can run the two games side by side. They couldn't run a similar version in two different...
No.
So I don't think, although obviously they do with AOS and 40k.
They've got Warcry and Kill Team and stuff like that, but they are fundamentally different games.
Yeah, and I think they could run a 40k Underworlds. I don't think it would alienate a massive amount of the existing fan base.
No.
Comment below if you think we're wrong.
Yeah.
But I think you've probably got all the warbands you ever wanted now. So you'd have a whole new slew of miniature ranges they could do. And of course, there's probably a much bigger game, 40k, than AOS. They will bring in a bigger base of people to play the game. And I guess for any game, if you love it, the more players, the better.
Yeah, I think whilst you'd have some people who would leave the game because they'd say, I don't like 40k, I like AOS, I'm not playing this, I'm leaving. And as Robin says, let us know in the comments below if you would either come into the game because you don't currently play AOS but you play 40k version of it, or would you leave if you're an AOS only player who would want 40k. But I feel like that less people would leave the game than would come into the game. So it would revitalise it, and it would reignite a lot of people's passion in it who play it currently, who maybe are getting a bit bored with it.
And although I think a lot of people who play the game do like the aesthetic, I think most of them like the cerebral challenge of the game. So if you weren't fundamentally changing that, you were just changing the setting, I don't think many of them would leave.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to worry about bolters. They'd still shoot 3 hexes because that's what a longbow does in AOS.
A slightly less left field choice, I think they should cut out doing 2 core boxes and just give us 1 core box a year.
I don't think anyone we've ever spoken to have said, I love the fact I get 2 core boxes a year.
I love having all those dice and all those tokens.
Yeah.
I love literally spaffing trees up the wall every time I buy a new core box.
So we think they should go back to just 1 core box a year, and they can still release all the other warbands and rivals decks throughout the year, so you'd still get 8 warbands and 8 rivals decks come the end of that year. But with 1 less core box and a little less faffing going on with new rules and changing things on the boards, they could then divert that time to other aspects.
Yeah, so you could see some reworking of old warbands being brought back in, and obviously they have done that with the Mirrored City, but I think for a lot of us that was actually overload, all that stuff at once.
Yeah.
So if you knew you weren't getting a core box, but you were going to get a couple new old warbands, reworked Axes and Reavers again, you might feel one core box is enough.
They could also use this as a chance to implement a sort of rolling 1-year rota of which warbands were in for competitive play and which ones weren't. I know again that a lot of people don't like saying you can't play that.
We've floated this before and got utterly pilloried for it, but we're going to do it again because there's nothing that drives internet clicks than people saying things you don't enjoy. I still think, and Pete still thinks, I think, that the best way to keep the old warbands relevant is to actually say, this year we're only using these 8 and revitalising, changing their cars and saying this is the 8 you can play with.
Yeah.
And then the others you might get to play with next year, but this year it's just these 8.
Maybe more than 8. 8 might be a bit small, maybe 16 or 24 or something, but whatever that number is, you wouldn't have 60 odd warbands, 30 of which you probably can't even get anymore to choose from, and of which most people only pick about 15 anyway.
Well, exactly. You can't play. It's not possible to play all the warbands regularly anymore unless you really, really have nothing else to do.
At least this way, we would then have some kind of official steer from GW to say, okay, these are the warbands at the minute you can play with, these are the rivals decks you can use at the minute, and it then means people can concentrate on warbands that maybe haven't got a lot of love in the recent past, and then maybe it will make the community just think more about some of those warbands, like they did when the Wormspat came out and they sucked and everybody was like, I love them, they suck and I love them and I'm going to try and make them good. Then maybe we get that with some other warbands that just don't get a lot of love. And then the 5th and final option, which is veering much more towards the left field of ideas again, is a 3-year cycle, not unlike 40k or AOS.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the person, so apologies, but somebody suggested that on our comments, and that actually triggered the whole discussion for this video.
It did, yeah.
I don't think they'll do this.
No.
But it has merit. They have, like Pete just said, a lot of their games are on this 3-year release cycle, and you could easily have, right, here is the Warhammer Underworlds core box, and this is the set theme for the next 3 years. So it's going to be in Akshi or whatever, and you can expect lots of fun in Akshi, and that's what you're going to get for the next 3 years.
Yeah, and that box would be purchasable for the whole 3 years, much like the AOS starter boxes, so it would always be there. You'd always be able to get hold of it. You wouldn't have to worry, I'm looking at you, Noel, that in 6 months' time you just can't buy it anywhere anymore. Every year they would then bring out another core box that would complement that main box, so you would still need the main box, but then you could buy these extra ones each year as you go.
Couple of new boards.
They'd have some new boards, some new warbands, some new rivals decks in.
But it would all fit in the overarching theme of the core box. It would all fit nicely together. Maybe it would have some rules additions, maybe like the primacy more mechanic, but it wouldn't change the core mechanics from the box. So that would be set in stone, or at least paper, for 3 years.
It'd be a bit like the General's Handbook that comes out for AOS. So you'd have some things that change in there. Maybe they change the way you build decks. Maybe they change something fundamental. But then they wouldn't have that for very long, and after a year it would rotate out again. And again, you would have warbands that you could rotate in and rotate out, and GW could then drive that by having like an official list of competitive warbands that can be played.
I'm just going to say, Pete did that deck art thing completely unscripted and off the top of his head, and I don't agree with it at all. Just going to put that out there.
And at the end of that 3 year period, they would then do like they do with AOS and 40k. They would reinvent the whole thing. That wheel would be recrafted from slightly different stone.
But I kind of do quite like that idea, because actually the hype, at least on the internet, and the comments that we get on the stuff that we do on the other games, people do love a solid reboot of a loved IP.
People love,
but not too often.
No, I think 3 years is possibly that sweet spot.
Yeah, I think that's probably why they do it.
Yeah. So those are the 5 ways we think GW could proceed with Underworlds into the future. We do think that whatever they do, they need to up their game a bit in areas to keep this game going.
Yeah, because we all love it. Which is why we got so many hits on the Is It Cancelled? And there's loads of you who love it out there, so I know a lot of you might not 100% agree with what we've said, but you'll agree with that something needs to be done to keep the game in the limelight.
So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Do like, subscribe, and ring that bell as always.
And if you do want to support us on Patreon, then you can. There's a link in the description below. You might as well do it while Underworlds are still around, really. Yeah.
And don't forget to leave a comment below about our question halfway through this video about, would you leave Underworlds if it moved to 40k, or would you come into Underworlds if you don't play AOS? So see you soon, maybe in the Underworlds.